welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Anansi Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Hey guys, this week on Digital Agency Real Talk, we're going to be talking about something that's a little bit appropriate for the time of year. That is to say, regular strategic planning. Ooh, so sexy, so fun. By regular strategic planning, today, Celene and I, welcome Celene, are going to be talking specifically about strategic planning. How is it that this, I think most of us can understand why and how it's useful for the business, but we will touch on that. We'll get into how it has changed for us over the years, as we've been now doing this for, I think, 4 solid years, and some of the real talk around how to make it actually effective for your company. So welcome, Celene. Are you excited to talk strategy with me?
I am so excited to talk strategy with you.
This is probably my favorite part. Well, I have a lot of favorite parts, but this is one of my absolute favorite parts of being on a leadership team, is the opportunity to spend some quality time with you, Celene, working on kind of the direction and vision for the next period of time for our business. This has also been so successful for us that we're actually rolling it out on a bigger scale to the other people in the team. So super, super cool. Fair warning for you guys, our listeners, we're trying something a little bit different today, and this is going to be a little bit less structured and a little bit note-driven. A little bit less note-driven than usual. So we're going to see how this format works. Since it's a real talk, we thought about, let's try just a totally organic conversation, and let us know what you think.
I'm terrified.
I'll admit, I'm a little bit scared too.
Anyone who's listening to this who knows me knows I'm like an obsessive note taker. I basically like annotate meetings.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well. Certainly anyone who's ever been on a project or done any consulting work or coaching work with me knows that I'm a pretty intensive note taker as well. But that's why it is fun to try new things and see how they go.
Push your boundaries.
Yes, push your boundaries. Step outside your comfort zone. So with that in mind, without looking at your notes, your non-existent notes, Celene, what are some of the reasons, off the top of your head that someone might want to do quarterly planning?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've actually had people who come to me be like, I've never really done this before. I know what my business is. I know what I do. I don't why would I plan? And the way I've described it to other people is it's kind of like a roadmap. So sure, you know what road you're on, and you might have an idea of what destination you want to get to, or maybe you don't. Maybe you're like on one of those crazy fun, college road trips where you just start driving and see where it takes you. But the way that we do quarterly planning or, even annual planning, any type of planning, is we really think what path do we want to take to get there? What are our short-term goals, our long-term goals, and how are we going to accomplish those? Not just what we want to do, but how are we actually going to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. If I were to answer the same question myself, what is it to me? And to be fair, I'm doing it through I'm talking through the lens of course, all the frameworks that I've learned and applied, is I actually find it's kind of reflective of the way that, unsurprisingly, the way that we build our content marketing strategies and our growth strategies, which is really that you need a concrete foundation. Strategic planning or quarterly planning allows you a regular pulse to just keep an eye on the foundation of kind of your brand and your business and your goals, and see whether that's still relevant, whether it needs tweaking or nuancing. And then also building a path to get there. And both of those things I think are equally important, like having that strong foundation. Who are we and where do we want to go? Basically, like, what is this all for? And even a little bit of the why in there, making sure that your why stays consistent. But also, and I'm a huge fan of this, anyone who knows me, breaking it down into much simpler bite-sized steps. So if you're feeling a little bit weak, or maybe a little bit confused or a little bit vague on any part of who you are as an organization, and as well as what you're working towards, both on a qualitative and a quantitative level. So both, what does it look like, and what does it look like financially? And then building basically like a road to get there in a systematic and simplified way. That's really, like, I'm not sure that I fully understood that when I started strategic planning. I was just kind of like, this is something I was told that I should do. But that's really what it's evolved into for me. And the challenge is not so much putting stuff down. It's about being really real and practical about what you're doing is contributing to it. I don't know. Does that resonate with you, Celene? Do you have anything to
yeah, no. I mean, it totally does. And especially that kind of like transformation for us over the years. Because I remember the very first time I did quarterly planning with you, I was brand new to Anansi, and you're like, yep, we're doing this because it's part of our like entrepreneurial operating system and we're supposed to do it. So that's why we're doing it. I mean, you didn't quite say it like that, but that's probably what I heard in my head. And I'm like, okay. And I show up and I had no idea what to expect. And then, like we get better at it. But I remember at the beginning, especially when we have our like 10-year targets, we both kind of shrug and we're like, well, what would you like to do in 10 years? What would you like to do in 10 years? And just kind of put something down. But it's really interesting to see over the years, and especially as I started doing kind of more complex projections and also have kind of data behind me to go on, is like really seeing that we're on that path and that we're kind of sticking to it. Or if we realize maybe some parts of our path aren't quite the right ones, or like tweaking them, that it really gives us kind of that reference and framework to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of on that real talk perspective, if I were to go back to those early years when I was doing quarterly planning, to challenge myself to go a little bit deeper than just because I thought I had to, which as a proponent of, radical personal choice, everything is a choice on some level. That isn't a super compelling reason, even for me then. But what I found, and I'd actually done a few sessions, probably 3 or 4 quarters of work before I did one with you, Celene, and it was still relatively arbitrary by the time you came on. But the reason I kept doing it and the value that it gave me was that it was throwing something up against a wall in terms of numbers, especially. I would say that was the most vague, was like, what are kind of our revenue goals? What are the measurables to get us there? Like I had no freaking clue 4 years ago. Like I had some ideas and stuff, but like we were still doing some full service web work, some copywriting. We were working in 2 different niches. It was just quite different. And so I didn't have that specificity, but the practice of putting something arbitrary up there, was really, really helpful because it forced me to start to take numbers and break them down a little bit more. And I'm talking napkin math. We'll get into this a little bit further, a little bit later. But our planning tool that we use for our high level leadership strategy, right? I mean, there's lots of different levels of strategy. The quarterly planning that we're talking about today is really at the leadership level. So high level revenue goals, vision, mission, that kind of a thing. That I hadn't really thought that far ahead. I was just still thinking about whether I could pay the bills, whether I could, make rent, and things like that. And this forced me to be a little bit more intentional about how many of my projects at an average price would it take to reach a certain revenue goal? What does that look like? Do I want a team? Do I want to go about it alone? What does 10 years from now look like? And those sorts of questions, especially if you listen to our interview with Carl Sakis, where, he talks about the stages of agency satisfaction and, going from powerless to overwhelmed to confident to valued. Back when I was in that powerless stage, there was no time for me to look ahead. And looking ahead in that way helped me start to shift my mindset out of that powerless stage, out of being totally at the mercy of kind of whoever wanted to do business with me, and into what do I desire my business to look like? And even if you've never done that work before and it feels super arbitrary, kind of taking a hard look at your numbers and also kind of starting to make some decisions around what you desire the business to look like and forming pathways to get there and looking at that consistently enough to, move towards it or shift where that guiding star. That was really, I'm not sure I identified it at the time, but that was enough to keep me doing it. And it was quite invaluable, even just 4 times a year. So hopefully this helps you guys, whatever stage you're at, whether you've never done quarterly planning before, whether this is something you've done a lot and are just kind of looking for a nuanced way to improve it or shift it. We're going to get into some of the pitfalls, some of the things we've done well, some of the things we struggled with, and what it looks like. Awesome. So, Celene, why don't you start by introducing the framework that we particularly use and kind of how we came to that, or why?
Yeah, so the framework we use, I'm sure that tons of our listeners will be familiar with it, which is kind of cool because you can follow along and hear like our take on it. And I know Say usually says these things, but I'd love to hear your guys' take on it and how you interpret these different areas of it. But we use the VTO, so the Vision Traction Organizer. If you've read Traction or familiar with the entrepreneurial operating system, you'll have definitely seen and probably used this. But it kind of has 2 main sections. So the first section of it is called the vision. So this is what you talked about, Say, is your kind of foundation that you build on. Like, who are you? What are you doing? Why are you doing what you're doing? What is your kind of like overarching plan? And then the second stage or the second kind of part of it is the traction. So what are you going to do to get there?
Yeah. Frankly, I think that the things that we're talking about can be put through a number of different lenses. If you're not sure, maybe you love the entrepreneurial operating system and Traction, maybe you hate it. Regardless, my kind of real talk perspective here is to just freaking pick something and stick with it. Stick with it for at least 3 or 4 quarters, I would say. That is about a year, which might be like, wow, that's a long time to stick with something if it doesn't seem at first like it's working for you. But especially, I would say, if you're new to strategic planning, just pick something, stick with it, force yourself to go within that framework, because you could waste a lot of time trying to build your own framework when there are many, many different strategic planning frameworks out there. And the important thing with this and so many other things is just to get doing it, and you will naturally improve with time. Personally, this was the first one I came to, and it has worked very well for us. As Celene mentioned, she does do more kind of complex financial projections, and we've started kind of creating and rolling out a more proprietary framework internally to kind of include our different departments in this. But it's 2 pages long. I like the simplicity and the succinctness of it. And it's worked really well for us so far.
Yeah, actually, it's funny when I was reading through Traction, the author, I think his name is Gino Wickman, he was kind of talking about how this came to be. He was starting a business. I think it was with his father and his friend or someone, but they came up with a business plan. And I hope I'm not like misremembering this, but I think it was his dad. His dad was like, can you condense this business plan into like 10 pages? And he comes back with like the new one. Can you condense it into 5 pages? Comes back. Can you condense it into 2 pages? And at this point, this guy's sweating. Like, how do I make a business plan in 2 pages? And then he said, can you condense it into 1 page? And it turns out like 1 page didn't work. And they kind of basically condensed an entire business plan into 2 pages. And that was like the very, very, very early thing of where this system came from. Is it's basically a business plan in 2 pages.
Oh man, that's so great. that it's condensed that way. I mean, I started my business with a more traditional business plan. And my gosh, even just waiting for the 50-page document, 50-plus page document to load was painful. So I didn't reference it because it was just too much information. While a lot of it was valuable stuff to start with, such as market research and that kind of a thing, ultimately, my business was so flexible over the years that it would have been a lot of work to keep that document up to date. Whereas this, I literally look at it every week. And that's actually the first thing, kind of as we get into more of kind of the what and the how of this. I will just say that this is meant to be, I hesitate to say working document because it's not something you should be editing all the time. I think that the value of having this kind of pulse is that it forces you within the constraints of your own goals to some degree, to a large degree, but not to a stifling degree. And that in itself forces you to kind of make better goals. Every 3 months, one of the things that I've heard quite a bit is that after 8 to 12 weeks is when people start to kind of lose momentum. It's far enough away from the excitement of initial goal setting that that like oomph to kind of like succeed and remembering just how it's impacting the business and all these different things can start to fade a little bit as the kind of day-to-day grind sets in. Because once again, this is high-level leadership stuff. So that's why it's valuable to kind of reorient yourself every 3 months. I know my business BFF, Sarah, from Pivot Ground, she actually follows, I believe it's called the 90-day year, and they do 60-day cycles. So, every 2 months. She finds that 3 months is just too long for them. So again, there's lots of different ways to do this, but no matter which approach you're taking, make sure that you're referencing this document often. Make sure you are referencing your strategy and your plans often. The agency leaders that are friends of mine who have not found it this effective, even though they've been kind of trying it, or they haven't found this as effective, even though they've been kind of doing it for perhaps even a couple years or more, is generally because they get all together in a room, make this big plan, and then they kind of tuck it away. And they get so caught up in the grind that they're not really referencing it and keeping it kind of reorienting themselves to it on a regular basis. So then, here comes your strategic planning day and you whip out your document and you're like, oh, how did we do? And it's like, oh, crap. We actually forgot about some of this stuff. Or, these are really good ideas. We should re-implement them or refocus on them. This is something, having been on the board of many nonprofits, I've experienced as well. So this kind of strategic work is better if it's a little bit quicker, a little bit dirtier, if that means that you're actually looking at it on a regular basis. And what are some ways, Celene, that you kind of bring this into your life and make a habit of like kind of making sure it's within your kind of vision and brain for the quarter?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two parts. We'll probably later kind of get more into the detail of what we include in ours, but kind of at a high level, I think of the theme that we set and our kind of like main goal for the quarter. Like this past quarter, it was storytelling at scale. So if there's, someone comes to me with an idea or we talk about something, and we've already kind of talked about how, our theme for next quarter is going to be visibility. We can say like, oh, is this something we should do right now? Does this fit within the theme of our focus? Or is this something that'll fit better in next quarter's theme? Like, is this really a right now idea? Is this going to help us achieve our current goals? Or is this like a shiny object or distraction? Or is this something that is an amazing idea, but we're not quite ready for yet? Like at a high level, I use it, just in my everyday decision making for, because there's always a million new ideas and thoughts and things coming at us. And then also, at a more basic level on a daily basis, we have our core values on here, which we obviously talked about in depth in our last episode, which I guess if we're releasing these monthly, you'll have heard a whole month ago, so you may have forgotten, so go back and listen to it. But I think about things every day, like our core values, like does this or does this not fit within our core value for decision making? I guess what I'm trying to say is I reference this document a lot to help me make decisions, whether an action is going to keep us on track or not.
Yeah, I think that's a really good as kind of a real talk thing, because one of the things I was actually sharing with the team earlier that, for people who are perhaps, the strategists or people who are more kind of in the employee zone, it may not be as evident to them kind of the reality of decision fatigue. And I know I struggle with decision fatigue a lot because I have to make so many kind of meaningful decisions, all with different risks and few with kind of clear outcomes. And a document like this, once again, helps remove a little bit of that decision fatigue by being something that we can like reference and say, okay, as Celene was saying, does this fit or does this not fit? I'm also really, really glad, Celene, that you brought up this kind of the word or the name. This is an idea that I got from my former mentor, Brent, about a year ago from the You Gurus program. And he encouraged us to kind of set themes. But it wasn't really until this year, probably a couple of quarters ago, where we realized that as we've grown, where before us who were doing the quarterly planning were the primary people who were kind of executing and consisted of the whole business. Maybe we had like one or two people to kind of share with and get excited. But we really were at the heart of it. But now we need to communicate, even though it's a 2-page document, right? Like the heart and the essence of it needs to be communicated in some way to the whole team. We were also finding that we wanted to anchor our goals a little bit more so that everybody could be working in the same direction. And making sure that we are kind of reinforcing that. So we started to ask ourselves, like, what could the theme for this quarter be? And it's really helped us a lot, like this quarter. And we may have talked about this in previous episodes, perhaps especially some of the early ones, but initially, because we've done so much work just refining and tuning in our process and getting feedback and implementing data and all this stuff this year, we really wanted to make visibility our theme this quarter and kind of revolve all around goals around visibility. But we really had to ask ourselves, is that possible? Now, with me going to a conference and us kind of re-releasing the website, and all of our photos and copying the deep branding work and all this stuff that we're doing, we realized that we were still in a ramp up phase. And frankly, in terms of capacity, we couldn't really make visibility our theme this quarter and expect to fulfill the goals that we had. So we asked ourselves, what does this ramp up period mean to us? What are we trying to achieve in this ramp up period? And how do we communicate that? So, when we did our, one of the key components of this, I would say, is a debrief afterwards to your team, if you do have one. So, in our quarterly debrief to the team afterwards, where I like to kind of share and inspire and also do an interactive exercise so that everyone can kind of get excited and involved and more connected. I presented this different idea. What if we take all of the concepts we've been learning and applying and make sure that we're re-emphasizing and understanding how it is different now that we are a larger team making a larger impact and operating in more systematic ways and just at scale, right? Like, what does that scale mean to you? At scale generally means more of everything. And of course, we don't want to sacrifice an iota of quality or focus. So that means that some of the stuff that worked at 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 people, now that we have 8, that and 8 consistently, and this is our mature size, we're having to kind of relearn things, right? The whole spiral analogy. We're not going around in circles, but we're coming around to the same things over again so that we can refine and define them and move them towards a point of great success. Anyway, I'm rambling a lot here.
I love it when you ramble.
Awesome. I'm glad. That's probably why we work so well together. One of many reasons. But this was, I would say, a major breakthrough for us, was combining the quarterly planning and the kind of setting a theme. I'm not sure it's something we were kind of given a process for, but once we started to ask ourselves, how can we kind of summarize this in a few words that we can kind of repeat like a mantra, and use that to help define our goals and check our goals against each other? It started to make this process a lot more practical. And that has been my driving force for the last few years around quarterly planning, is how do we make it practical and effective? We've also tried a ton of things over the years. One of the kind of textbook things they say about quarterly planning is to get out of your normal workplace and normal work zone. Um, so, what are the actually? I don't know if we've quite finished on this. I just wanted to, in terms of bringing this into your life and checking in, making sure this is in your everyday life. I just wanted to add before we leave it behind. I make this part of my weekly kind of routine and planning. First thing on Monday mornings, I pull this up and I actually read through it and just make sure that I'm referencing it. I mean, it just takes 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but it does make sure that I am kind of aware of, especially the things this quarter that we're focusing on. And we also work it into our meetings. Did you want to share a bit around that, Celene?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess obviously like the very, very, very biggest meeting or biggest time we work it into meetings is immediately after we do a quarterly planning. It's usually the next our next L10 meeting, which is on Mondays. We give the debriefs. We first of all, we just straight up tell everyone what happened at quarterly planning and like what sort of things, what are our new goals or focuses, things like that. Our theme, Say does an amazing speech every quarter that kind of ties the theme together and also how it's relevant to our team. Like not just like, oh, so this is this, like, tuck it in a corner in the back of your head and forget about it again. But like, what sort of things can people expect to see or hear about or think about? And we do like exercises to tie that into them, so it engages our team and makes it personal. So we kind of roll it out, and we mention it throughout the quarter, especially as we're, like I said earlier, talking about whether different things fit in with our theme or our plans or not. One thing I'm really, really, really excited about this quarter is we realized now that we have quarterly planning, or we have multiple departments that kind of handle things. Like we have sales L10s, we have marketing L10s, that we're actually rolling out quarterly planning as an activity at our kind of, not only the leadership level, but at the departmental level as well. So, Say and I are going to get together ahead of time. We're going to set the theme and our very, very high level goals. I think we're actually doing that this week. And then we're doing quarterly planning with our departments and saying, instead of like putting goals on their heads and be like, okay, so this is our quarterly goal that you're going to now do. We're going to give them ownership of it and really kind of take that time to be like, hey, what worked really well last quarter? What was awesome? What did we kind of suck at? Or where could we do better? And then like, what do we want to achieve next quarter? What do we want to achieve in the next year? Like, what is our focus on our plans and goals? And then, Say and I are going to have our regular like leadership quarterly planning. So we're really implementing this at a whole team level so people can take ownership and feel responsibility and engagement with it, as opposed to it just being like us kind of putting it on them and expecting them to care about it. I may have deviated from your original question, but I got excited because I was working on the quarterly planning process and template for sales and marketing earlier today.
Oh, that's really awesome. Well, I do want to kind of real talk this a little bit and say that if you do have a team of, 5 or more, or if you do have people who are kind of leading one primary hat or kind of arm in terms of what they're doing, and you have never done quarterly planning before, I do not suggest you start with this. I suggest, as a leader with your leadership team, or just yourself, if it's just you at the leadership team. Also encourage you, if there are people who have critical thinking leadership potential that you already trust and kind of, operate with at that level, even if they're not technically an owner or a partner or something. Once again, like Celene and I operated. Now Celene is chief of ops and pretty much runs the company. But back in the day, even when she was just working for me and stuff, I just appreciated her insight and value and did include her in that process because it's good to have someone to bounce things off of. But start simpler. Start with just the kind of high level, a framework like the VTO, etc. But what we have found, since we've been kind of decentralization of leadership, that was our theme, I guess, last quarter?
Yes.
I think, yes. Is that now it really, really makes a difference to be able to nurture and trust the people in their respective roles to look at the data and make goals within those roles.
Yeah. And especially, sorry to jump in, but I was going to say, like, for you and me, like, neither of us are in the sales role. We're not responsible for sales. I mean, we obviously have an idea of what's going on with sales, but we're not like down in the nitty gritty every day. It doesn't, or, you know, and same thing for marketing. It doesn't even make sense for us to be the ones to necessarily work through all of the what worked and what didn't work stuff, because we weren't there kind of on the front lines of those areas.
Totally. And oh boy, I have definitely found that in our leadership weekly meetings, which, by the way, we do. I think we've talked about this in other meeting or in other episodes. Or, you know, if you do follow EOS, then you're aware that we do an L10 style of meeting, which includes checking in on our quarterly goals and just doing a quick check whether we're on track or off track every week, which also keeps them top of mind. But a lot of those meetings is solving issues. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm just so used to putting on the leadership issues list that we get to leadership issues and we start talking about it and realize, wow, this actually, we are not the best people to talk about this. One of us or both of us would actually be better served to talk about it with the person who, you know, like who is actually doing all of the account management and active sales and everything, or the person who is running all of our inbound marketing stuff. And that's a really cool and different place to be. And maybe some of our listeners are listening to this and being like, oh yeah, definitely. I think if I know our listeners well, more of you are thinking, oh man, how do I get to that? How do I make sure that my like sales or marketing person is actually totally in charge of that? And it still does require often our expertise or our touch or that being cascaded down to them, or, you know, maybe even cascaded back up to have a leadership feedback or approval on whatever that conversation you know, births. But it's one of those things that kind of showed us that it was necessary to have this kind of storytelling at scale period before easing into the visibility, because it does take time to adjust to these kinds of changes. And to also, and I would say this is a critical part for us of the quarterly engagement as well, is to look at that data, is to make sure that you have some KPIs, that you are holding your team accountable, not in a, you know, did you do well enough? What does this look like? But where are we? Did we fall short? And sometimes, as again, if you guys were listening to the Carl Sakis interview, that they don't always come out in exact order, but it's one that I recently recorded. Then he talks about, you know, sometimes you have to make some hard calls as to whether people are fulfilling, even if you like them, you know, sometimes by the data, they're not fulfilling their roles. And this presents an opportunity to, number one, interpret that and see their strategic ability to kind of, you know, navigate that within their field of expertise. But also for you to have an empowering, not you know, punitive or pejorative way to assess those numbers and then cascade them up to leadership to talk about later. So once again, and then people like to set their own goals and be in charge of their own stuff. I mean, we do it, they do it. It helps people feel more stoked and more part of the team and more empowered. And at least for us in our business model, we are a lot more of a lateral team than a hierarchical team, in the sense that, you know, we do have a clear kind of chain of command and stuff, but we really believe in people being accountable and taking initiative for their own, you know, responsibilities, but also field of expertise. Like, I don't want to micromanage you. I want you to be better at it than I could ever imagine being.
And not only that, but like, people really hate being told what to do.
So true.
Let's face it, like, nobody's ever been like, oh yeah, like my boss is on me for this, and that. I'm so stoked. I just love it when they tell me like what to do and how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, I think we're told so much to be kind of order takers in most fields, most of the time, at least like in the agency world and stuff, that it's still sometimes really easy to kind of follow orders without fully understanding the why behind them, without being super stoked on it, and possibly even, you know, feeling some mild resentment. Now, again, we're speaking from the perspective of an extremely tight-knit team that loves supporting each other and stuff. But let's face it, we're human. We're all human. And giving people agency and power in the sense of giving them the ability to be guided so they're not running your company off a cliff, but in setting their own goals and achieving them and getting better at that quarter after quarter, that also engenders a lot of, I think, loyalty, because even if you're someone who prefers to be in the framework of another company, you can be your own boss in the sense of you're being accountable to yourself as much as you're being accountable to your superiors. Now, of course, you do need to make sure you have the right person in that kind of role who loves and I would say not just accepts, but like really thrives and craves that kind of individuality, even if they're nervous about it or something, I think that that makes a big difference. Yeah.
So true. And yeah, I mean, just like quite frankly, like as you'd say, real talk, I'm super interested and excited to see how our first ever kind of departmental quarterly planning goes next week.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to report back to you at a future point with a future episode, maybe, one of the upcoming ones, maybe next quarter, to reflect upon it and just, assess how we're shifting or what worked and what didn't, because we are about that real talk. And as I love saying, it is an iterative process. Most things in running a successful agency, a successful business, or quite frankly, in my opinion, a successful life, come down to iterations, which means being willing to embrace failure. And we as we like to say, we don't necessarily like to use other people as our guinea pigs so much as we like to use ourselves as guinea pigs, and just see what works best. How can we critically think and make it better? And I love that about us.
So true. I think, we have absolutely like no notes, no script, no plan. We're just rolling with this. But I think it might be good to talk a little bit about what we actually like, what our quarterly planning includes. For people who may not be familiar with EOS or their own systems, or maybe they use a different system and they're just curious what we do because they're nosy, or well, not nosy. That's why they're listening. That's why we do this, because we want to share.
For sure, because running a digital agency can be lonely, but it doesn't have to be. I totally agree, Celene. So what I'd love to do is I'd love to break this down in two different ways. So I'd love to break down, number one, what are the actual components of, say, the quarterly plan, like page 1 and page 2. And I'd also love to break down like what it looks like for us in terms of, how do we plan it and execute it, like in terms of time frame and like process and schedule. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. So I guess let's start first things first. What do we actually have in our quarterly plan? So as you know, it's 2 pages, but it's like size 9 font. Maybe size 10. So
yes. We will include a template in the show notes, of course.
Yes. That will have like TM EOS on it so we don't get sued.
Yes, absolutely.
So the first thing that we always go through is kind of the vision section. So that foundation. The very first one is core values. If you listen to our podcast regularly, you heard us dedicate a whole like hour or so to talking about core values. And this is like honestly the coolest one to start with. And it's really interesting how, when we first started doing the quarterly planning and core values, we just kind of put some down. Some were copied from other people's businesses that we thought sounded good or that we wanted to emulate or whatever. And some were our own. And now, like when we do it, like really, I mean, we kind of sometimes just like, does that work for you? Does that work for you? And we're like, yep, good. But more often we talk about those like nuances or like which core values are resonating more with us this quarter than last quarter and really kind of dig deep with them, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did just do a whole episode on core values, so we won't dig too deep into those here. But exactly what Celene said, it is worthwhile, I have found, to kind of put them into context so it doesn't just kind of fall into routine every quarter of being like, yep, and kind of talk them through with a little bit of a story and like how they're applying or not applying, etc. And on a just purely practical note, 3 to 6, 3 to 6 of them, they're usually like what I've both seen what we do between 2 and maybe 6 words. So it doesn't have to be a single word. You can give it a bit of context, but you really want to keep it quite succinct here. And I think that's useful. I will also note that if you have ever worked with us or developed a brand or done any content strategy, either with a client or for yourself with us, you will know that on the bulk of our projects, this is something that we ask and clarify if you haven't already. And if you have done that with your client or with yourself, we will dig a little bit deeper. We don't necessarily want to see anything super generic on there because we believe this is such an important foundation, especially of the next section we're going to talk about, which they term core focus. Now, I'll be honest, we quarter after quarter have kind of modified this a little bit. So the way we define core focus, which might be a little bit different from the EOS model, is we just clarify that as being the vision, the mission, and the UVP, the unique value proposition. Did you want to unpack the difference between those, Celene?
Yeah. So, I mean, well, you'll probably like real talk wordsmith this better than me afterward. But the vision is kind of like your high level utopian like goal for the world. So for us, it's to build mutually supportive communities, which may kind of sound vague, which is why we kind of have our mission, which is more of like the how and the what, like that, like how do we actually do that, right? What does that mean? So our mission is kind of twofold. One, it's to empower people to live fulfilled lives by bringing them to clarity around info, products, and services that help them. So, kind of on a practical level, like we write content and we don't write content to persuade people to buy or like make people take action. We legitimately, like it's our mission to help people make informed decisions about connecting with, businesses and services that really represent them and are going to be a good fit for them. And number two,
and I just want to add there that the kind of connection, and we'll see it as we get into the UVP, which is what we do on a more practical, surface level, I suppose. This is something that we perceive when your mission is overlapped with appropriately with the work that you do every day. You are literally doing this mission every day. So on practical terms, yeah, we are writing copy to, on some level, you could say, yeah, persuade people to take action, persuade people to buy. But we're always looking at it through this lens where if it's not actually empowering somebody to live a fulfilled life, then we are either not doing our job effectively or we are perhaps working with the wrong person. And as years go on, it tends to be less and less either of these things, and more the capacity to actually unite these. Anyway, but please, number 2, keep going.
Now, so our second kind of point to our mission is to connect organizations with clients that want to ecstatically engage or throw their money at them. So we always talk about like the Fry from Futurama, that like shut up and take my money meme. Because really, like we want to help businesses, whether they be, like nonprofits or for-profit businesses or whoever it may be. We want to help them get clients, and not just like, yeah, let's get all the clients in the world and amass them, but really get them those clients that are going to be like diehard devotees of their cause and just like absolutely love their brand and what they do.
Yeah. And for us, especially in the early days, I referenced this a lot, even if in my conversations, and again, through the lens of, is it, because we do work a lot with nonprofits where it's not necessarily a sales transaction that's going on. But when it's just like, oh my God, just take my money. I just want to throw my money at you. When I think about the companies that I just want to throw money at, and I can think of a few off the top of my head super easily, that generally implies some stuff. And that stuff is that, you usually share values with them to some degree, right? They're usually solving a genuine problem for you in your life or your business. And they're usually doing it in such a way and the type of people that you just genuinely like them as people and want them to thrive and succeed, which is part of both an abundance and a growth mindset. So even in the early days before all of this was, and I'll be honest, our vision and mission have not changed pretty much at all in like 3 years, probably.
They've been wordsmithed.
Yeah, they've been like tweaked a little bit. The UVP has shifted a little bit, like how we get there. But It really, to me, conveyed a lot. And I'll just share a little bit of a story that I don't think I've shared on the podcast before, which is that I came up with our vision and mission initially, or the initial versions of them, actually at a point in my life where I was very, very depressed. And I had been working at this business. I was living in a fifth wheel trailer. I had started this business. I'd been working at it and working every day. We were getting some traction, sometimes, like most businesses when they first start. But I was really struggling to get up in the morning and focus myself on work. I was struggling to give a crap. And I knew this was a problem, both because the community I was a part of and someone, Tracy O'Shaughnessy, from Branding and Beyond, was excellent. Anyway, amazing agency, amazing woman, super deeply respect her. And she talked to me quite passionately about how your give a damn is your strongest and greatest resource as an entrepreneur. And she had been in danger of losing her give a damn by throwing herself, kind of the opposite, throwing herself too much into projects, into people. And to realize that if she wanted to thrive and succeed in business, that give a damn was something that she had to preserve. And so I asked myself, I was like, well, what is your give a damn? How do you figure it out? And that led me on a journey. I absorbed some content and went through this like giant document. I'm not remembering the name right now. And it started to lead me through some of these questions around vision and mission. And it led me through an exercise of, looking at different periods in my life and identifying when I had been especially happy consistently and like fulfilled, not just happy, but like fulfilled and excited to get up and like excited about the impact I was making. And just like write those down and look through them and understand what about those experiences was just so empowering and fulfilling, and work backwards from that. And the funny thing about doing this is that many people like myself have done a huge variety of things in their life. So this exercise, it's unlikely to just be, like writing gets you up in the morning or something like that, right? It usually pushes you to go deeper and think a little bit more robustly about this. And that was how I started to understand, for me in my life, I had worked at the University of British Columbia in their communications department for student services. And this is a story I have maybe not shared on this podcast, but on other podcasts and stuff, where that was the first time in my life where beyond financial transactions, our goal was really to structure websites and structure information so that people could access and just have better lives, just have better lives. And through that, it created all of these other side effects and stuff. And it was just crazy going through this, how much it inspired me in other points in my life, ranging all the way back to a kid. And even just going through this experience, which was less about arbitrarily picking, I would define vision exactly the way you did, Celene, that utopian, like what is it you're trying to achieve? But in terms of making that meaningful and relevant, I have to say that the experience of defining it was so effective in kindling my give a damn and helping me see beneath and beyond, what I was literally doing every day, to the impact that it could have, and having that shape my business over the years, that I was honestly terrified to share it with you, Celene, and to share it with the team. And my first quarterly planning, I half expected you, or ultimately someone of they, to actually be like, no, I can't get behind that, or I don't know, that's just not me. And the magic of having a team of people who, we can wordsmith this vision and mission, but who are totally love it and are on the same page, which of course is something that's developed over years and works with the values and et cetera, is so empowering and is so part of having a deep and a strong team. And this isn't a story I wrote up in prep for this or planned on sharing, but I'm actually glad that I had the opportunity to share it, because I don't often think of that. That was such a long time ago. But vision and mission can be quite powerful, because I will tell you, I did not stop being depressed. If I'm going to be totally candid, it was probably another year or two before I was able to dig myself out of that hole, both physically, emotionally, and mentally, or all three of those. But it definitely kept me focused and kept me going on Anansi, which was a huge anchor in my life because of that. And even today, sometimes people will be like, oh, TGIF. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess so. That's funny. I actually really like my job, even when I'm stressed. So not to say that people who say that don't necessarily like their job, but I wouldn't, even when I was super busy, I wouldn't necessarily look at Friday as like an escape the way I had in other positions, because when I was writing, when I was talking to people, etc., I didn't just see what I was doing. I saw that vision and mission behind it, because sometimes I did have to tell myself that my vision and mission to get out of bed. So anyway, thanks for listening to that extended rant. I don't know if you knew that story, Celene.
I did. And it's funny. It's like a good reminder too, because when you were talking like initially about the vision, and I'm thinking like, to build mutually supportive communities, like that's pretty broad. There's so many different ways that someone could go about doing that. And I realized that this is something that you also do, like in your personal life. You
Absolutely.
build mutually supportive communities. This isn't just like an Anansi vision. This is your life vision, but how it kind of comes how it comes about in Anansi is, like through a mission and what we do. But it's really like a driving theme in your whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to reiterate how blessed I feel that something that is such a personal mission for me, even after being kind of nuanced and shifted by other people's perspectives, is still something that remains essentially unchanged in terms of its ultimate goal. And that's really cool. But we did miss one piece, which, again, if you've ever worked with us, is we consider to be a key part of the messaging. Even at the starter level, we always make sure we include is a unique value proposition. And us in this form, it is contextualized by our vision and mission. So we've used our "we help" statement as opposed to the more formal UVP we sometimes use in strategies and messaging anchors for clients' sake. But this is where it really gets practical, in the sense that for us, we help digital agency owners take conversion content fully off their plate. And again, there's many different ways to build a UVP, but for us, for this practical document, we do like the "we help" statement. So just to break that down quite briefly, we help generally stays the same, blank. So who is your audience, right? And then what is it that you help them achieve at the root that is ultra valuable for them? And this is something we've shifted a few times, but for us, it really is like take conversion content fully off their plate. And each of those pieces is significant, right? Like conversion content, right? Lots of content providers do blogs or et cetera. So that specifies what we do as a company, Anansi. And then what is that helping our audience achieve? Right? Well, fully off their plate, i.e., for us, this reminds us that our goal is always to make sure that they don't, you as a partner don't need to micromanage us. We hit all of our scheduling on time. Your client knows when everything's happening right off the top. If there's areas where you have to participate, ahead of time when and where they're going to be. And of course, the conversion copy is both awesome and effective. So again, this used to be a lot longer and wordier, and we've kind of simplified it to the point where, quite frankly, we use this phrase in our marketing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's on our website.
Yeah, it's like no secret as to what we do. So that was voices cracking there, but that was just the core focus. Let's move a little bit more rapidly, perhaps, through the next few sections here.
I won't speed through it too fast, but I'll speed through it pretty fast.
Yeah, it's okay if this episode is a little bit longer.
Yeah. So the next one is the one that I initially found kind of the most daunting, is the 10-year target. So what does your business look like in 10 years? And originally it seemed pretty arbitrary, and it seemed, and it got less arbitrary over time as we started talking about it more in our goals for the future. And then one day I literally sat down and broke down the math pretty much year by year, and also by what that looked like in terms of numbers on our team and different things like that. And then it suddenly felt a lot less arbitrary, which was awesome.
Yeah, I bet. I definitely struggle with the 10-year a little bit. The 3-year is a lot more relevant for me. Perhaps because we have not yet been in business 10 years, it's hard for me to kind of imagine what that leap looks like. And many people who have been in business 10 years or more, there was a period of kind of stagnancy in there. Often at the beginning that, I'm not sure how to kind of correlate. But the components of 10-year target just relatively rapidly. So we include number of staff and who they are, roughly in terms of role, what our gross revenue is. So just roughly the amount we're going to be taking, and you don't have to break it all down at first. It probably took Celene a year or two to get that far. The specific date, so we adjust this every quarter. So right now it is, it actually says June 30th, 2029. So we clearly forgot to update that the last few quarters. But at this point, it would be December 31st, 2029, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And then for us, because the first time we opened this, I was like, I intend to be like a mom in 10 years. How do I reflect that here and stuff? And that's not to say that you can't be a mom and like run a super awesome company like this, but just that for me, that opened up some questions about like what our relationship and what the business would kind of look like. And we ultimately, that was where we first kind of decided that Celene would be working towards assuming operations. Because I think the very first time I was like, I kind of want to sell my business in 10 years. And you were like, I could just run it for you. And I was like, that would be awesome. I joke, but I don't think it was more. I honestly think that's like about as simple as the conversation was. And then we just over the months and years unpacked that further. And I'm so glad that we did, because I love this company. I'd be really hard pressed to sell it.
Yeah. And just to be clear, obviously it's impossible to predict where you're going to be in 10 years. I think I've said this before, but probably not on an episode, probably just to you directly say, is that like pretty much almost any period in my life, if I look back 5 years where I am now, I could have never predicted 5 years before. Things happen so unexpectedly. So it's not necessarily to say, oh, this is exactly like obviously it's never going to look exactly like that in 10 years. It's more to give you like that long-term goal to work towards that helps inform your kind of medium-term goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that ended up being quite significant. Even though a lot of that conversation was arbitrary, it allowed me to take a little bit less fear into myself at kind of delegating things and moving some things off my plate, because I'd already kind of assessed, if that's something that I want to do in 10 years, I'm going to have to start thinking of that earlier than just 10 years, especially since you're moving that 10-year target back every time you do this.
Yeah. And I mean, if like, let's say a hypothetical example, your main driving goal was to sell a business in 10 years, then, our short-term goals would be different, because we'd be focused probably on a lot more like recurring revenue and stuff that drives up a business's value. We'd be working on things that can be, easily shifted off and not depend on you. I mean, we're doing that anyway, but like, if that was your goal, then there'd be more steps in between, or it would inform the path.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just to move us along, so marketing strategy, we could literally do a whole episode on. And
probably will.
Yes, we do have a whole episode specifically on growth strategy, which is slightly different. That's an internal term we use. But the way we break it down here, I'll just keep it high level, and then we'll move on. Is your target market. So we have this in terms of demographics. So, like role, age, number of years in business, size of company, that kind of a thing. Geographic, so that where to look for people. As well as psychographic, what are some of the kind of green flags in terms of the people that you are marketing to. And this has been really good for us as we kind of like look at it through the lens of our own archetypes and our values and all this other type of stuff.
Yeah, shockingly, the psychographics align fairly well with our core values.
Totally. So EOS also recommends 3 key uniques. We are rebels and have 4. Again, they won't be a huge surprise to people. They're like on the front page of our website, hyper organized and process driven, dedicated account manager, fewer partners, deeper relationships, and live feedback sessions being ours. Again, some of that may make sense to you, some of it won't, but we won't dig in too far here. Proven process. This is really, really critical. If you cannot simplify your project process into like 5 steps or less, then you may have some work to do. For us.
And also it's hard for someone to communicate it to somebody else. Like how do you do what you do? Like, what can I expect? If it's like, if 20-step process, they're never going to remember it or be able to absorb it.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we work with a lot of agencies, so the process is often somewhat similar, which is discovery, strategy, content, design, programming or implementation, and launch. Are like, that's just off the top of my head, but that's fairly simple. And of course, for us with our rebranding, probably by the time this episode is aired, we will be releasing new kind of names for our steps. But basically, it comes down to kind of process weaving or needs assessment, some sort of foundational strategy, which we call our messaging anchors, like our anchors and foundation point, foundation copy, and then growth strategy. So again, we'll cover those in another episode or series of episodes. And last but not least in this section is a guarantee. Now, this is something, again, it took us a few years to kind of ease into, and we haven't really popularized it yet. But guarantee basically says that it's supposed to make it a no-brainer in the sense that you are so confident in this aspect of your business's value or your process's value that you are offering some sort of risk mitigation for the client. So for us, it's almost a little bit scary to say it out loud, even though we totally stand behind it. Our guarantee is that you get your money back if you're not satisfied with our process within 30 days. And I, encourage you. Your guarantee should feel a little bit scary for you in the sense that, it's really valuable to the person who's receiving it. But at the same time, for it to be effective, it should be for an aspect of your business or your service that you feel so freaking confident on that you have no issue, paying that out or making good on it, because that person who's not going to appreciate it isn't the right fit anyway, or it's not the right fit at that time for them. And that's as much of a good thing to know and understand a lot of the time than pushing through when it really just isn't a good fit. But the last piece of the vision sheet, which for me has been one of the ones I've had the greatest kind of progress and the most relevant value, is the 3-year picture. So do you want to break down for us, Celene, what the 3-year picture is?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say I really, really like the 3-year picture because it's far enough in the future that you can kind of like dream and plan and get excited about maybe, like putting some ambitious goals there, but it's not so far away that you can't envision it and you can't take steps to achieve it, which is what excites me about it. So, what we have in ours is, well, first of all, the future date, like that's what is 3 years, just so you know what date to achieve it by, right? What is your revenue goal? What are some of the measurables that are specific numbers you want to achieve in order to meet that revenue? Because again, revenue is pretty arbitrary. But for us, we talk about like how many projects per month or per quarter we want, how many staff we want, and like what our recurring revenue is. And then we also outline kind of like our staff, like our team size and who that entails. And then we have like a few more of, like what does it look like, right? Like, do you have recurring revenue at a certain percent of your total? Do you have savings in case you have like slow periods? Do you have like different health benefits or incentives for your team members? Do you have, like, for example, we put things on here that we've like slowly crossed off as we've achieved them, which is super exciting. And, like some of the ones that we've crossed off that we've achieved already are like market wage for all workers. And I mean, our market wage is probably a lot higher than other people's market wage because we really want to pay people what they're worth and have amazing people that we can afford to pay what they're worth. We don't want to be paying people like bad wages just because we want to make more money.
Also, I mean, quite frankly, for the level of quality that we provide, that's not an entry point in the market.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like for any role, there's going to be a range of kind of a junior level versus a senior level, et cetera. And make sure that you are appropriate in terms of your pay for the range in which you are, if you, and it's totally okay also, to be delivering things that are valuable, that are not necessarily like being total perfectionists and the best of the best of the best, right? Maybe you give the best support and like working with clients, maybe you're super good with like branding, which is less, specific of a measurable. But it's really important to just make sure that you understand what you desire it to look like. And I just kind of want to real talk each of these little sections here. So for the revenue section, for me at first was quite difficult to understand on a practical level until I broke it down into monthly and started to tell myself a contextualizing story about it. So I'd look at, okay, what's our monthly revenue now? How kind of big do I want to be in 3 years? How hard am I willing to work to make that growth happen? And then what does that look like in terms of both how much we need to sell monthly and in terms of how many projects that is to execute? Like at one point when I was doing all the project work myself, we had been setting these numbers and they were still more in the arbitrary zone. And we broke down because measurables should really be napkin math, right? So for us, we just basically took down, okay, what's our average project size? How many of those projects would it take to sell to get to a certain revenue goal? And then what sort of capacity, how does that balance against my personal capacity? And we found out that at that time, what was our then starter level was kind of what we were doing the most of. And I was delivering them all, and that we would have to sell like 10 a month or something at that level in order to make our revenue goals. And I would have to deliver all of those myself. And I like thinking about that made me want to like break down and cry. But you know what? We had been hustling to sell and to make those revenue goals. And it was a really important and needed wake up call because now it gave us different issues to solve and things to ask ourselves. Like, could we be happier at a smaller size, right? Do we want to increase our average project size? Do we want to increase the volume? Do we want to increase the capacity? These are more reasonable questions to ask. And ultimately, we determined that working with a different subsect of our audience, we could make what was then kind of our highest level more of a mid-level and really be like solving problems more effectively and going deeper. Because what we were doing is we were doing a lot of kind of like rapid turnover, smaller projects, but we weren't really getting to dig into the more in-depth kind of brand and strategy work that we loved doing. And also I realized that I loved having a team and Celene loved working in a team. And that's where we started to think about, okay, maybe we need to expand capacity sooner rather than later. What do we have to do that, et cetera? So this might be kind of an overwhelming amount of questions for you to hear. But what I'm trying to say, just to kind of back it up, is that the relationship between revenue and measurables. So make sure you understand that relationship. If the top line annual revenue number is a little bit too abstract for you to work with, then do break it down monthly because that's simple napkin math, and ask yourself, do I have to double or triple to get to that? Is that like basically where I'm at now? Make sure it aligns with your business goals because us, for example, like our 3-year business goal is more than it's actually more than 3/4 our 10-year goal because we want to grow to a certain size relatively rapidly and then sit there indefinitely. We don't want to be a humongous company. We don't want to be more than 8 or maybe 9 people. And that kind of informed our goals as well. When you get to the measurables, this is the part I think we've changed the most and struggled with the most. But we've really just simplified it down to what is the napkin math thing you can count in a simple way to achieve your measurable goals. So an example that I've heard, although I don't think it applies to most of our listeners, is like franchises. If you are like a big company and you want to open a certain amount of franchises, that will reflect a certain revenue goal. For us, I think it is often projects per month or projects per year, depending on the size of your projects. For us, of course, we are a subcontractor. We do a smaller part of a project. So for us, we do more projects a month that are split between our 4 strategists, right? We have 3 numbers here. We have recurring revenue, number of strategists, as well as number of projects per month or per quarter. And I would say the most relevant number that we focus on the most is the number of projects per month or per quarter because that affects the recurring revenue that we sell. It affects a lot of different other things. Does that make sense?
Of course, it makes total sense to me. I mean, obviously, like I do this every quarter with you.
I'm also not sure whether staff was part of the original one that EOS gives out. But for me, it really, really helped me to kind of see at a super high level the roles and what I would need to support the kind of volume or the kind of like a lifestyle business or whatever it would look like. So now for us, because we're kind of at that mature level of staff, I would say that it's not quite as relevant, but in the early days, I really loved it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still relevant because when I do my like fancy spreadsheet projections and stuff, like I see like what are our revenue goals? What does that look like in terms of projects or in hours? And how many strategists do we actually need to fulfill that much project work, right? So it's all interrelated because otherwise, you get to that point and you're like, oh, I sold all these projects. Oh, great. Now who's going to do them? Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been there
and it
so
helps us
freaking
plan.
often. Oh my
Like,
God, we've been
and
there.
some of our biggest decisions is like how and when do we decide when we need to start hiring for a new position?
Yeah, absolutely. And don't let anybody tell you you need a team if you don't want a team. There are plenty of ways you can manipulate this variable so that, for instance, you are doing a far fewer volume of projects at a much higher value, that don't require you to necessarily have a team. We just like having a team.
Yeah, or contractors.
Yeah, contractors, right? There's also many different versions of a team. We have a kind of combination team where we operate like an in-house team 100% in the sense that we have like weekly well, actually it's hard. It can operate a lot of different ways, but we want the kind of culture and dynamic of being really a super tight-knit team. But the way that we've built our model is that because we have people who work internationally, some of them cannot technically be in-house employees. And some people, are strategists, especially earlier on, took out and work for outside people as well. And we kind of scaled up or down as we needed it. And then we also have kind of very classic full-time in-house employees, who get, since we're in Canada, CPP and EI and all those kinds of things. The abbreviations might be different depending where you live, but basically, unemployment insurance, pension, all that kind of stuff more formally. And we also actively seek to provide similar benefits for the people who are, our in-house contractors, so to speak, as well. But it could look a whole bunch of different ways, like infinite possibilities, basically. Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, so I'm gonna move us along to our traction section.
Totally. So actually, I just want to pause us here, Celene, and for our lovely editor, you can edit this part out. But I'm looking at the length of the episode, and I'd love to officially cut it off and tell them that we could still record it today if you want, or not. But I would love to make the traction section a whole other episode, like a part 2. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think that's an awesome idea. I think we should probably record it another day just because I don't know if you can hear it, but my voice is starting to crack a little bit.
Totally. I hear that. I desperately,
and I'm coughing more and more and
pee,
needing it. So,
but I can definitely I can hear the scratchiness in your voice. This is also, I think it's a lot of information to digest. And this gives us just a super awesome opportunity to sit on it, chew on it. Personally, I think this format has gone extremely well today.
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. Okay, so you give the editor okay, and then fake okay, and then like cut it off or wrap it up.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So this marks the end of the section to be edited out. Yeah. So, as we come to the end of the 3-year, that really brings us to the end of the vision section. So once again, you don't necessarily need to be using this particular framework. However, if you want to, it is a free resource that they offer with a template and etc. Again, we'll provide our version with a link back to them. And they have lots of guidance and stuff to walk you through it. We're just really trying to give the real talk perspective of where this has worked and where we've kind of shifted it up over time. So we're not just kind of parroting information that's already out there. But there is, believe it or not, this is only half of it. And we do want to cover the traction section, which is a much more closer future on the ground pathway. And we also want to talk a little bit more about, well, quite a bit. We haven't touched on it pretty much at all, about how to schedule this in, how long it takes, how much time to take out of your day, or out of your week, what to do if you're super, super busy. Do you travel? Do you not? Do you do it in your office, etc.? We're going to dig into that on our next episode, and we're going to get super deep into the nitty gritty of those different sections. So if you've been thinking about this and thinking, oh my gosh, I want to start implementing it, go find the template, set yourself, a timer, an hour to just look through it. And start thinking about this foundation, because all of this stuff is the foundation. I will say that once you get this locked down fairly well, it will stop changing very often. So, we go through this whole section, but not a lot changes. We just kind of nuance it at this point, and not a lot has changed for probably a year or two. It's okay at first if it's changing a lot, but it's just one of the kind of green flags of success is that your foundation isn't something that should be changing all the time. It should just shift in small ways over time, or it should be a big decision to make a radical shift if that's the way you go. Anyway, so next week or next session, will be all about the implementation. So all about how do you make this work? How do you make it effective? How do you get towards these big, hairy goals? How do you make sure that you're living these different pieces and using them to make more money, make deeper connections with people, and just generally be happier, more fulfilled, and more relaxed as a leader in your agency life? So definitely tune in next week. We are going to do these episodes back to back, just so that if you are implementing it, you can kind of get the whole story before Christmas, and hopefully before your next, or if not before Christmas, then at the very least before your next strategic planning session. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. I have really, really enjoyed doing this with you, Celene. It just feels like we're just hanging out and having a conversation. It's great. Turns out we know stuff.
Turns out.
Yeah. Who would have
guessed? We've done this before.
I know. It's almost like we've done this many times before. Ooh, I don't know. Anyway, though, thank you, listeners. Thanks for tuning in. As always, we'd love to hear from you. You can find all of this information as well as show notes online on our website, anansicontent.com/podcast. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear how this works for you, what you like about it, what you don't like about it, whether you tried EOS and hated it and wanted a different model. We want to hear it all. In the meantime, we'll talk to you next week. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.